Hi everyone, welcome to Rugby in Lockdown 3. This one is one that's close to the heart of very much the Rugby Journal, plus all of our readers, and I know it's of concern for everyone in the game, and that's the impact of lockdown on community grassroots clubs. And there's lots of different ways in which it can have an impact. Obviously, there's a lot of uncertainty, and as with all these debates, no one actually knows any of the answers to. We don't know when this is going to change, but what we're trying to do here is we've got a really great panel from lots of different clubs and even unions as well. We've got Mark Nelson from Lancashire. We've got Chris Forster from Brixham in Devon. We've got Dickon from London Cornish, and we've got John Heatherington from Consett in Northumbria, and Steve Grainger's joined us from the RFU as well to hopefully answer some of your questions at the end of it. So we'll start off with John. John, tell us about your club and tell us what's happened with you guys since lockdown taking place.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. I'm from Consett Rugby Club up in northwest Durham, not quite in Cumbria, but other side of the Pennines. So we were recently promoted. We've had a really good season last year, promoted from level 7 up to level 6. And I think really the main downside of it is that we got promotion and then everything happened. So everything, there was a great big downer straight after the promotion. I suppose from an abrupt stop, this is where the biggest problem comes. Our business model, as I'm sure many clubs have, is working on hospitality. We have a well-known sports bar in the town. The town's a small town, but it's got we do have a good following of customers, not rugby based, but good sports followers, and do have some good loyalty with the team. We've also got a good summer package of stuff that we do from a commercial point of view. So we have a marquee. We have a lot of things, and a lot of money is really created in the close season, and a lot of money spent in the close season to repair the pitches, make sure that maintenance and all that sort of stuff is maintained. From the club point of view, we've got around 300 members, ranging from under fives up to senior teams, regular first and seconds. Third team's been a little bit in and out this year with a couple of games going in and weather and all that sort of stuff. And then we've got a growing vets team, so vets sort of third team is coming in as well. I suppose from where we had the issue of closing the pubs on the Friday, that was an immediate stop. We have a team of bar staff. We managed to furlough those guys. That was something that we decided that we wanted to do. We didn't want to lay people off. We've got a regular team who've worked with us for a long time, and we wanted to be as committed to them as we could be. I think as the month went on, it was quite clear that obviously the payrolling of that was going to become a problem, because we had to bankroll that for the first month. I'm pleased to see that how quickly HMRC have really turned that around. We applied for the loan the furlough payments last Tuesday. That payment came in this morning, so we've got that, and hopefully that's now a regular weekly payment in to the staff. So we know that we've got a team there. From the executive committee point of view, we've got a good understanding. We've got a lot of communication, and really what we're trying to treat this as is a business pause. The problem with the pause is that you've got to unpause it, and that's the unknown entity at the minute. We don't know when that's going to be, and I think that's the biggest uncertainty and the biggest cause of concern for me. Looking down as treasurer of the club, looking down every single line of what we can do. So the biggest expense was staff, so we've gone through that. Gone through with the brewers. We've got some good relationship with our brewers. We've just agreed a new deal with a brewer. Unfortunately, it was 2 weeks before that happened, so we haven't really got some of the upfront cash that we were going to get that might have proved useful. But I think we should be in a fairly decent position to restart. I think the brewers have been excellent in the main, and certainly from the industry I've seen, is that they are prepared to replace untapped kegs on restart. So I think that's a bonus, certainly from us. We've got a stock in the bars, so we're ready to go as soon as that's replaced, and we don't have that outgoing straight away. I think that's one of the biggest pluses for us. But as many rugby clubs are, we're hand to mouth. We're trying to make sure that the money coming in is spent as wisely as possible. We've got tight budgets, and we're working to them to make sure that the club is as successful as possible. And in the place where we're from, County Durham, certainly Northwest Durham is is noted as being in one of an area of not deprivation, but low income. It's a low income area. The money that we create through the sales in the bars is taken on and contributes to the running of the clubhouse. It contributes to everything to make sure that we can keep our memberships as low as possible, to make it as accessible as possible. And that's the biggest concern. So, we've got a plan going forward. The loan from the RFU was something that we took and we've taken on quite quickly. We did have some work that we had to do earlier in the year that meant we were sort of behind to some extent from a standing start. So that was going to be paid for by the summer events. In terms of loss of income, we've got the Euro 2020s that from a sports bar point of view, that's a large take-in. We've got a marquee that we give out to community groups. Those have all gone. I think the one saving grace, or hopefully the one light at the end of the tunnel, is that we do have an open air cinema event that we'd run in August. Hopefully by that time we might be able to get people out in the open and get them on the pitches and have an open air cinema. But we wait and see if that's going to happen. Going forward, I think the concerns of the executive committee and the rest of the club is actually just when is that restart and what does it look like and how much have we got to finance. If I look now, we can look forward to 3 or 4 months where we're covered, but cash flow is the main problem. Now we've got to look at what's going out. I think what I've been really comforted by is the grant, obviously, from the government, which has been excellent. That came through quite quickly. The suppliers that come in, going from the point of sale, the credit card machines, every single company that you've talked to have been prepared to do something for you, whether it's a payment holiday or whether it's a payment reduction. Even going down to the credit card machines where they're £25-30 a month, they've agreed to do those down to £1 and £2 a month. So, there's benefits there. It doesn't sound like a lot, but actually it adds up over 3, 4, 5 months. And that's something that we've really got to do. I think what's also been mentioned, I know we mentioned in the chat room there, Alex, before, is that, next season, when it starts, whenever that is, how pre-season works for the guys. As we speak now at the end of April, we're not thinking about pre-season, we're thinking about the end of season. And so there's a little bit of time left. But with what that situation looks like, how contact sport will actually be able to come back into society and how it can be restarted is a key concern, I think. Because the longer it goes on, the longer we don't have the ability to have people training or together or doing things, that's where we're really going to start suffering from a membership drop off and from all the work that we've done over the last 6 and 7 years.
Are you what are you worried about if you've got payments like mortgages and bills like this on the actual building itself, that if this goes on too long, there could be any threat there?
Yeah, there's a mortgage on the building. It's quite low. The bank has been really good. They've done the payment holiday. They've agreed to the capital element anyway of the payment holiday. So that means that we are paying interest, the interest back. But it's a minimal amount in terms of the overall cash flow. I think now we're going down to the real bones of sort of even just like BT bills and sort of trying to say to these guys, look, we're not using this at all. The whole place is in mothball. We don't want a line rental, but coming out of agreements of line rentals with BT. They're not really coming forward all that much. The hangover where you've got bills for utilities. So if you have the quarterly bills, that was one thing that really was a concern, where we've got the January, February, March quarter for a utility bill that's paid in April, when they've got no income coming in from that. That's certainly been an issue, and we've had local AAP grants as well to sort of look and soften the blow a little bit. I think so I think really from an expenditure point of view, we've brought it down and tried to really bring it to as little as possible and make sure that we have a clear understanding of what the cash flow looks like, a clear understanding of what's going out over the next 3 months, and a clear understanding of what could come in. You can do 3, 6, 9 budgeting, you can do some forecasting, you can understand exactly what these things are, but you can do it every single day, and the next day there'll be a different decision to make. So I think that's the tricky part, and that's certainly not for me as the only one around the country. The biggest bit of expenditure that we really are having a tussle with in a real back and forth with the rest of the committee is the pitch renovations and maintenance that is classed as normal maintenance. We can't get grants for that. People aren't prepared to pay grants for regular pitch maintenance. So where you look at APs, where you look at Sport England, this is seen as routine maintenance. It is routine maintenance in the normal aspect of life, but we have a summer program and our budgets are made on various things and throughout the year. The fact that we potentially aren't able to maintain our pitches is going to have an impact longer term, because if we don't do it now, we're going to be extrapolating that cost into next year. It could damage the pitches this year. Whether they get paid on is obviously a different thing, but we've got to hope for some sort of playing as well. But the upgrade of that does have an impact in terms of cost, because we do hire an AGP pitch from the local council that's next door to the club. So that's the biggest struggle, because if we can get a grant for that sort of payment, that would be something that really would sort of settle a lot of people, I think.
And in terms of sort of how you sort of move forward, what would be the latest you think you could stay the same and start rugby again without causing too much trouble? Because obviously at the moment, depending on who you ask and who's guessing as well, the chances of grassroots rugby this year seems under threat.
Our initial, as I said, we've got 369 budget in. If you look at how the subscription year works, our subscription year works on when the kids go back to school, so September time, and when the season starts. So we've budgeted for subscriptions starting again in September. I think we're okay to get through to that point of view. I think if it goes on longer than that, then obviously the subscription income drops down. That's going to have a knock-on impact. But equally, some of the spend that you would have normally made in terms of electricity and gas won't be being made either. So I think that could be moved on. I think that's the next real part of sort of where the tipping point is, of if subscriptions drop by, say, half. If you say, right, we're just going to do half subscriptions because we're going to go past in January. Where we are in Northwest Durham, January in Northwest Durham is not when you start getting kids out to start playing rugby. It's not that's not an attractive opportunity, unfortunately, unless they're absolutely dead keen. So, I think we're hopeful of some point September, October time. I think we can just stretch it a little bit longer than that.
Okay, that's great. Thanks, John. Just to move on to Chris down in Devon with Brixham RFC. Tell me a little bit about your side of things.
Hi, Alex, and good afternoon to everybody. Thanks very much for being with you. So Brixham is a level 5 club. We are very much a community club. We've got a membership of around about 600 people within the community, and that doesn't include youth. We run teams from 2 senior teams, Colts teams, Vets teams, ladies and youth from under 7s right the way through to 16. Plus we've got a rugby Cubs group. Last season, we had a very poor start to the season, ended up down the bottom for the beginning of the season. Started to pull that around throughout the end of the season, and we were actually coming well back up. We ended up 5th in Southwest Premiership, and I think if we had played the games, we could potentially have gone a little bit higher. We also were heading for a Devon Cup final, so obviously disappointing that all went by the wayside. As I said, we're very much a community club. Our bar is open from 12 o'clock until 11 o'clock every single day. And it is very much the centre of the community. So we've estimated that between March and the end of June, we have lost about £210,000 worth of income. That's made up of obviously home games that we didn't play in March, other big games that we had planned. We had a big past players event organised, caravanners. We had 3 sets of caravanners through the summer. And lots of other community events, and everything, as with everybody else, has just gone totally. So our revenue has gone to zero. With the finance team and the directors of the club, we've done some cash projections, and very much as John is saying, we've taken a number of steps to address issues of expenditure and also looking at income. So we've got our staff team are on furlough. and that has been a very worthwhile and a very beneficial thing to happen because, as John said, you've got a very loyal base of staff and you want to keep hold of them. Secondly, we've got the local grant, the £10,000 relief. Currently having conversations with local authority because we just missed out on the 25. So I'm trying to see if we can actually try and get that. Not hopeful, but it's worth a conversation. We've applied to Sport England for their grant, which is great, but concerned that that's slow coming through and actually getting no information and no detail and no response. We are in the process of looking at the RFU loan. I was hoping to see whether we were going to get the Sport England grant before I did that, but it looks as if we will apply for that. And then also the CB money that's been awarded from the RFU. Devon RFU have put out a process already to apply for a grant there, so we'll be looking at that. The big questions are, how much do you start to try and pull forward revenue? So as an example, John was talking about membership. Now our membership, it starts in August. And we've taken the decision that we've actually opened up our membership early. So we're inviting people to pay their membership before to support the club, to see if we can bring some cash in, because cash flow is the key. We've also taken an initiative where we are offering a limited number of life memberships to people, where we're offering that at £1,500 one-off payment. And that will give an individual free entry for the rest of their life, and also an entry to the famous Brixham hospitality, Alex, that I know you will remember. Sure. So that's an interesting one, and we've had a bit of an uptake, which is good. And the benefit there is that there will be an immediate cash influx. We've started a crowdfunder appeal, or a Just Giving page, really to reach out to our 600 members, just to try and see if we can try and generate some revenue. One of my big concerns is sponsorship. We are very well supported by our local community, and specifically the fishermen. Brixham is a large fishing port, but they are absolutely getting hammered in relation to their income. So we have to be very mindful when we talk to our sponsors that rugby is in a very different place to what it was 4 or 5 weeks ago. So that's going to be a really good conversation and an interesting conversation. We've also started to talk to people about when we get back to playing, what can we do for the local community as well? So as an example, I've already put the nails to the mast in saying our first game will be free to all, and then we will raise money on that day for local NHS and local charities to try and keep that interest coming. Similar to John, we've taken all the steps with regard to utilities. The brewery have been fantastic. We've got a great relationship with our brewery, and that is a real thing off the mind. So that's really good. As far as wider, what I would say is that some of the clubs within Devon are very concerned. Some of the smaller clubs, if I talk about the likes of Paynton, Torquay, Newton Abbot, they are fearful that they could go to the wall because they've got absolutely no revenue coming in at all. And certainly some of the clubs were in the red, from the word go. So that's a huge concern. And I know Devon
is it more the case that, because you are supported by the fishing industry, it's effectively philanthropy almost that you've got there, as opposed to Torquay and Paynton going for more commercial ones? Is that the reality of it?
In some ways, yeah. I mean, we've got some very good commercial sponsors, but yeah, absolutely right, Alex. There are some very generous fishermen that have looked after us, and we've got to be mindful that they are maybe not going to be in that same position. So for the likes of Torquay, Paynton, Newton Abbot, Topsham, they are looking at commercial sponsors, and they are concerned. So those are some big things for us. I think the other thing is making sure that we're keeping in contact with the players, starting to set up, what the new season looks like. We're also going through a coaching change. So we've had to address some of the costs of coaching that we've had, and that has incurred some change of personnel. But I think that we're right to take those decisions now, rather than waiting for 3 months down the line. So we've done them, and then talking with players.
Okay. All right, thanks for that. Thank you, Chris. Dickon as well. So you're obviously London based, but have a sort of boot in the Cornish camp as well. What's your situation and the other clubs you've heard about?
Yeah, so London Cornish and Exiles Club. We run 3 adult sides only. We're based out of southwest London. We're a bit unusual in that we don't own a clubhouse, we don't own a pitch, and we don't own a training facility. So we rent everything, and our turnover, for the entire club is about £40,000 a year. We don't pay our players; they pay us for the privilege of playing. I suppose our number one concern as we sit here right now is how many players will still be interested in playing when the action kicks off again. We have gone to the Middlesex RFU for a loan, which I believe we have been granted. We're also looking at grants as well, because there's every possibility that the people that rent us our pitches and our training facilities are going to want payment whether or not we're there, because to all intents and purposes they could probably let those things elsewhere to other people, and there are myriad other organisations that would probably be keen to snap up the space we have. In terms of the situation that we're in, I think one of the things we've done well is we're using social media to keep our players in touch. There's huge interest in what we have going on Instagram, and I think a few of the other clubs have had their players show videos of themselves doing various athletic things that I'm far beyond the age that I can manage. And we also have found, just by chance really, that some of our founder players from back in the early 60s have got into touch with each other and got a burgeoning email list going. They're not on social media and have started distributing some of our founding sort of fixture lists and photographs and first ever team photos. So we've started sharing these on our website in order to try and garner some interest with a view to seeing if these are people we can get involved in the club when action does restart. The revenue we get is primarily through sponsorship and through player subscriptions. So a bit like Chris, I think we're going to be relying on some of that coming back when things restart. But you can tell players that the action will restart. You can't tell them when, and so I think that's a very difficult sell. It's a bit like you hear some of the horse racing people talking about getting their horses to peak for big festivals. Knowing how much run time you've got until the action restarts is going to be key in making sure that people are ready for the action. I know we'll all be in the same boat, but to my mind, one of the big issues is you can't replicate contact in your own home, and that's the big thing that worries me. I know when I stopped playing and then started again, the hits that I was getting when I stopped didn't hurt. A year later, they hurt like hell, and that really is a concern to me that we're going to get players that haven't played for a while and they're not going to be quite as conditioned at the sort of levels at which we play. London Cornish are a level 6 side. We are in an unusual league next season where we have London Welsh and London Irish in the same league, so it's a pure tri-nations amongst some bigger clubs that are around and have been up the leagues like Camberley, some of whom are very well funded, and will have probably programs far in excess of what we can offer. So we are in a slightly unusual situation. We do have a solid coaching team who are a standout, and I'm proud of the work that we put in last season to stay in the league, which wasn't a given at Christmas. We regenerated the squad during the season, and that's done purely by a few of us headhunting players as they come up from the West Country. We can't offer them any money, but we can offer them a very organised club. And we try and be the most professional outfit off the pitch that we can possibly be. Most of the lads we recruit already have jobs in London, and are moving up here, and we only train once a week, so we hang our hat on that, because if you're somebody that wants to be paid and train more than that, then we're not the club for you. And it's an incredibly competitive player landscape, Southwest London. I think someone told me it's the highest number of rugby clubs in Britain is congregated in a 10 square mile part of Southwest London. And you know, Alex, there's a lot of rugby clubs in London. You're all competing for quite a sizable player pool, and it's often the case that money talks. We tend not to lose players to other clubs for money, but that is something that we're trying to make sure that we tell people on the way in. If you want to get paid, go somewhere else. In terms of Cornwall, I was in touch with David Saunter, the chairman of Cornwall RFU, yesterday. He made an interesting observation, which was the clubs down in Cornwall have been very slow in their take-up of the various financial offers that have been issued, and in fact, in some cases, have gone around the Cornwall RFU and gone straight to the RFU. And that's something that they're trying to investigate. His big concern is around player interest. That when the action kicks off, will players really want to play again, particularly those where there's quite an increase in travel involved? That's something that I think affects all of the clubs in the Southwest, is the concept of whether actually they'll have the numbers to be able to play matches, let alone the money to be able to put into helping them travel. There are some great initiatives. So Hale, who actually have one of the back pages of the local press down in Cornwall, talking about the fact that promotion from level 9 to level 8 is a real struggle for them given the extra travel, but they've run an event recently in conjunction with Disability Cornwall and the Cornish Oven to provide pasties for the elderly and vulnerable in the area. And I think those sort of community spirit actions are the sort of things that will tie clubs more closely in with their communities and ensure that when the action does restart, they're well placed to benefit. I'm somebody that's quite vocal on forums, and I always put my own name down so people know who I am. My own view is that from a volunteer perspective, volunteers can't wait to get back out there whenever the action starts. I'm in touch with a lot of people, and there's a lot of pent up demand to get out and not be under the feet of our various spouses, partners, and kids. So I'm confident that the volunteer support will be there. I'm less sure about the players. The one thing I would, and I'm going to sort of ballot the RFU on this, one thing think would be really helpful is I've heard that it'd be great, the fixtures may be released for the new season, and it might be you can't put dates against those. It'd be great to put rounds against those, so round 1 through 22 or 1 through 26, and then to map out for everybody various scenarios. So if the season kicks off as normal, here's the fixtures as they go. If it kicks off in October, here's how we'll do it. If it kicks off in January, you only get to play everybody once, but here's how we do it. I think that would be a really useful way of us being able to go to sponsors, to our players, and then as a coaching team, you could then sit down and map out how you support the various scenarios. So that's where we are. I think I'm open for discussions to help with the RFU in any way I can. I think the way that we got the league sorted at the end of the season was great credit to the RFU to get that out quickly and communicated quickly. I think it's very helpful, and it's not had many dissenting voices, bar the odd one or two. And I think the quicker we can act, the quicker we can all go back to our clubs and put contingency plans together.
Great, thanks, Dickon. We'll add all your questions at the end, but let's just finish off on the club roundup with Mark, who's obviously heard a few stories around Lancashire. So tell me what's happening in Lancashire, Mark.
Yeah, well, I think you can ditto a lot of what's been said by Chris, John and Dickon at various levels within Lancashire and the Northwest. I mean, I would want to look at what are we calling grassroots clubs, because where does that definition start? Because if you take the Premiership and the Championship, i.e. 24 clubs, and in the Championship it's a bit of a freak show anyway, how the clubs are formatted there. So you then look at National 1, which is level 3. Always saying that is the beginning of grassroots or the community game. Mm-hmm. If we are, then that is virtually the vast majority. Well, not virtually, it is the vast majority of clubs in the RFU. So effectively, what I think we've got to look at more importantly is how we're dealing with it micro at each individual club. And as like I said, with Chris, with John and Dickon, you can have examples like that all across the country and certainly in Lancashire. I think, how do we come out of this as a union, as clubs? And I think we've got to look really strongly at how it's structured and how it's funded. And the other example you have had by Chris, John and Dickon is the quality of people who are actually running our rugby clubs. I don't think there'll be another sporting body that have got A, the facilities, and B, the level of person within each club across the country to take the clubs forward and take the game forward. So I think we're actually at a very strong base to go forward, but I think we need to know where we're going forward. And to that end, let's look at levels 3, 4 and 5. Level 5, you've got regionals, you've got the Premier divisions for the North, the Midlands, the South West, well, the East, South East and South West. Then you've got your 2 national divisions at level 4, North and South, and then you've got National 1. Now, I think we've got to look at regionalising those to create a lot more derbies, if you will call that, across the board. And at the end of the season, I think we've then got to look to nationalise that in terms of playoffs. So you've got the best of both worlds. And I think whatever the outcome of this, because it will hurt financially, as that's been outlined, I don't need to go over that and don't need to give examples, from Lancashire, because, it's accepted that there's going to be a financial impact. But I think if we get it right as clubs, as a union, given the strength we've got within the game, then we can take it on to a new future, if you will. And Dickon was talking about, and this, this last thing I'll say on this point, is that the players are crucial for this. And this is why I asked right at the outset about what is a grassroots and community game, excuse me, is that the game is very difficult to play for players at levels 3, 4 and 5. It's a very full-on, compact, very technical game. And I think the player base is diminishing because it's getting harder to play. And I think with that is an issue we need to look at as well.
Yeah. I mean, let's move on to Steve. Steve, do you want to give us a bit of an overview on your role and also what you've been doing since lockdown, really?
Yeah, sure. Good afternoon, everyone. And first of all, just to echo the words of Chris, John, Dickon and Mark, really, a huge thank you to all of the club volunteers who've made this crisis slightly less of a crisis than it could have been so far. So, I mean, the RFU really is just like any other rugby club, and the situation that's been described there about loss of revenue and the impact that has is exactly the issue that we're dealing with at the moment. 5 major events in terms of 2 big Premiership games, London Sevens, Barbarians game, and the Army Navy game that we've lost the revenue on over this 3-month period. And of course, that's the sort of driver for many other opportunities and investments. So it's 43 days since we made the decision to suspend rugby. It's been a long 43 days, but I think it's been incredible to look at the work that's been achieved at local level by many clubs. So our immediate priority really has been to try and protect the members, hence the sort of close down of the game with all the medical advice that was there, to understand the impact that's having initially in the short term. We can plan all sorts of scenarios for the future, then to introduce some appropriate support, and to continue the sort of liaison with government and other sporting bodies to A, make sure that our clubs can get the best support that they can, and B, that we are in the best position to understand the impact and everything going forward.
What is available to clubs in terms of financial assistance?
So I've just lost my camera, so you'll just have to bear with me for a moment. But
we can see you.
You can, okay. I can't see any of you. That's probably the best.
Can't see those questions. It's fine.
So what's available at the moment? I mean, the let me just deal with outside of rugby first and foremost, outside of the Rugby Football Union. So the biggest thing at the moment for many clubs, and not all clubs, because it depends, as some of the speakers have said so far, on those who pay business rates, but are for anybody that's paying business rates, and that's about 800 of our community clubs, eligible for either a £10,000 or a £25,000 direct government grant. And in many cases, that doesn't even have to be applied for. It's coming directly from the local authority that clubs pay their rates to. And indeed, many of the clubs have already got that money in their accounts. So we're clearly trying to support and encourage and identify where clubs aren't getting that. And then there's also, as I think it was John or Chris mentioned earlier, the Sport England grants of up to £10,000. Encouraging as many clubs as possible to apply for those. The RFU have then introduced a loan facility of up to £5 million, so offering loans of between £2,000 and £10,000 to clubs, and these are really intended to address the issues over the next couple of months, so immediate cash flow issues while lockdown is happening. And those loans, basically, there's no payment required for the first 6 months, and then they're paid back at zero interest over a 3-year period. And then we also released a total of £1 million, which was topped up by 400,000 from reserves from the individual constituent bodies. So a 1.4 million, again, immediate support fund. And that was intended to be smaller amounts of money, direct grants. So typically, a club like Dickons that's not running its own facilities, that's not paying rates, that hasn't got all those utility bills, but that might have had a coach bill outstanding for 350 quid or 800 quid for travel from the last game of the season and literally hasn't got any revenue to pay it. And nobody wants that debt hanging around volunteers' necks. Yeah. So those are the key things that have been there so far on the revenue side. But then clearly our biggest focus now moving forward is to try and look at when rugby is likely to be rebooted, and it's the question everybody is clearly asking. Yeah. And there's a simple process that we've got to have there. That first and foremost, we've got to follow government advice, and we've got to wait for that government advice. And I think at some point next week we'll get a clearer steer as the first phase of the lockdown starts to approach. At an appropriate point, then we can look to restart rugby activity, and I use that terminology deliberately because that's likely to before we can get into any sort of contact training or contact rugby, and on the back of then we can look at the competition restart. And just to Dickon's point earlier on fixtures, we actually start that process with a meeting this Thursday evening with a group that's been established to look at exactly that, which is, if the league season can start as normal in September, implications are fairly limited. If it gets pushed back to mid to late October, how will that then play out? And what we're trying to deal with a worst case scenario at the moment, but who knows, if competitive rugby fixtures didn't start until January, what would that then look like? Because
presumably with a sport like rugby, I know it's not directly comparable, but golf's looking at changing the format now to 2 players, no caddies, various other things, and they obviously can start up much earlier. But rugby would be the opposite end of this spectrum, wouldn't it, because of the contact nature of the game when it comes to starting up?
Yeah, if you look at it's hard to see that we're not the last cab off the rank, or virtually the last cab off the rank. There's probably us and judo as sports where contact is absolutely central to our game. Yeah. In the DNA of our game, there's arguably 2 things. One is contact in both senses of the word, with players and between players, and then there's social gatherings, has been mentioned, very clearly by John and Chris in terms of the revenue opportunities. Those 2 things that are in the DNA of our sport are the 2 things we're not allowed to do at the moment. Yeah. And there's some big challenges in that. And I think as Mark and others said, the other key thing is there's definitely going to be an impact on our players wanting to come back, or on families wanting them to come back, or on employers who they work for wanting them to work in different ways. All that stuff is outside of our control, really, but we've just got to be ready and prepared to react to it.
But sorry, can I just quickly jump in? Is that okay?
No, go for it.
Yeah, just that is what I'm sort of saying, just to praise what I was talking about before, the new vision of the game. Isn't, Steve, do you think, if we make it imaginative, that we're going to come back to a sort of almost a brave new world within the game that looks at these issues, that makes it exciting, that makes players want to be part of that, coaches want to be part of that, volunteers want to be part of that? Isn't this a golden opportunity to look at that?
Yeah, I mean, Mark, that the sport, there's we've got every spectrum, haven't we, from the traditionalists to the radicalists and everywhere in between. And whilst there's a whole host of people that are absolutely wedded to a league program, regular fixtures, knowing when they're going to be playing and who they're going to be playing, to the other end of the spectrum where there are conversations going on at the moment from clubs who are saying, well, let's have a year off league rugby. Let's not bother with league rugby. Our players aren't going to want to travel. Let's just regionalise it, not even regionalise it, localise it. Let's get back to playing some local derbies against other clubs and go there. And, the challenge is, as ever, it's finding a mid-ground that the majority are going to be happy with. But there's no doubt about it. We're not going back. We can't go back. We won't go back to the world that we all knew before. It's a brave new world, and nobody knows what it looks like at the moment.
Could that be a positive then, like that people have had more time to think about league structure? Because obviously, I mean, Steve, I'm not sure when your role starts, but obviously right now, from top to bottom in the English game, there's a lot of change happening, whether it's Championship, National League, even Premiership breaking away from themselves. We got so much change, but could the one positive be that there is time now to think about structure?
100%. And I mean, there's definite opportunities, isn't there? Things are going to be different. So I think the key thing we've got to do now as a sport, and this will take some coalescing, but we need to take a leadership position on that.
Yeah.
Getting to that leadership position and getting to a position where the majority are on board is inevitably the challenge. But things are not going to go back to how they were.
And what impact does, because obviously, England not having games, that's an impact on the funding. What kind of predictions are you making in terms of funding that's going to drop down to the grassroots as a result of lost revenue at the top level?
Yeah, we're not in the position at the moment of saying what's not going to drop down to the grassroots or what's going to drop out of other areas of the game. But the position is pretty clear. I mean, we saw a £15 million reduction in revenue over the 3-month period to the end of this current financial year, and an optimistic view that autumn internationals do get played, but they get played with crowds. Will still see us about £35 million drop in the next financial year. If autumn internationals happen behind closed doors, that's an additional different ball game altogether.
What sort of advice is available? Because there's obviously people are trying to, I think Dickon touched upon it. Half of it is about keeping teams together and players together. What kind of advice are you given about ways to keep your club engaged with its members when there's no rugby or there's no drinking? Either or would help.
So the best examples are those from clubs themselves. So, they're not, we can come up with all sorts of ideas, but at the end of the day, clubs want to hear what other clubs are doing. So we've set up a dedicated area on the England Rugby website, englandrugby.com/coronavirus. Yeah. And there are opportunities there to input ideas. There are examples of what clubs are already doing on that area and on that site, and really we'd encourage clubs to feed their ideas in and crudely nick ideas off each other and copy ideas off each other, because they're going to be the best ideas.
Where's the best place for them to go in terms of advice on loans that are available and those sort of financing things? Should they be going to their sort of regional union first, or is there a place on England Rugby where they can go? How do they find out about what these guys have been talking about?
So all that information is at englandrugby.com/coronavirus. So that's got funding, advice on both the RFU, loans and things, all of the government support, whether that's furloughing, HMRC time to pay schemes, VAT deferral schemes. All that information's been bespoked and put in that area. There's also a club support centre in there. So clearly we've furloughed a lot of our locally based staff, but there's a club support centre in there. So if a club's got a query and it's not on the website or in the frequently asked questions, just put your question in there. That'll go through to a central support centre, and we A, will get back on that, and B, we'll probably turn that into an FAQ.
And this is perhaps a question, I'm sure Mark's got experience with this as well. Like in Wales, obviously, they've made a big play for stopping payment of players below a certain level. Is that something you see being able to be something that could happen in England, so that players below championship level or national one or wherever there is a cut-off point like there has been in Wales and clubs sign up for it to help themselves? Is that something you could see helping or even being manageable in this? Because I'm pretty, looking even at the panel here, I'm sure there's several clubs here that have no clubs at their level that are pay or do pay themselves.
Well, just very quickly, I'm aware that I've spoken before, but that's why, again, I'm asking about the where does the community game start? And I honestly think if you try and impose and call it an amateur game, national 1, national 2, even down into the Northern or the Premier teams, I think you'll have real problems. I think the genie is out of the bottle on that one. I think trying to put it back in, I think there can be imaginative ways of paying players, looking at gym memberships, insurance, etc., that sponsors can do. But I don't think you'll go back to a purely amateur game. Personally, I don't think you can.
This is where.
Go on, John.
Sorry, this is where there's been a couple of clubs around us that have said similar things, that actually, where Steve talks about the game and world is never going to be the same. It's not going to be the same. And I think where you don't want to see clubs going to the wall and falling up. I think where the government's got things in terms of furlough. It'd be interesting to see how many players are actually going on to furlough and sort of being paid in that way. And I think the other comments have been made to me about, how many of those players are actually going to stick around if they aren't being paid during this problem. And that comes back down to commitment and what they actually do. And are they actually sort of playing at a rugby club because of the money, or are they paying the rugby club because they want to play for a rugby club? And I think that reflects into what Dickon's saying earlier about, this is where these rugby clubs are. Certainly from our experience, I'm adamant we don't want to pay. We don't do those sorts of things. It's not the right element. The ethos of the club is growing the game and growing the club by taking the game out to the younger areas, from under 5s all the way up to under 12s and 13s, and really start focusing on those 14s and upwards for the next 5-10 years of the club, and how you get local talent to come in. And I think there's a mindset shift that's going to be needed in a lot of clubs, probably from perhaps level 6, level 7 and below, of what a rugby club actually means. Is it a community rugby club, and what is the aspiration? Where are those clubs actually going to stand and say, this is the level that we are happy with? And is the measure of success, so say from a geographical point of view, is the measure of success for a club in Northwest Durham to see players come through the under 5s all the way through junior rugby, and then see them turning out for the Newcastle Falcons, and then onwards to England in the likes of say Mark Wilson, for argument's sake, going through those bigger clubs, stepping up those levels, and actually pushing them in the way to say this is what this club has been responsible for.
Steve?
I think I think you both Mark and John there have hit the nail on the button. Really, we're talking about needing to reset the dial here, and there's definitely something around the competition structure and the churn in many of our leagues at the moment, with a lot of clubs being promoted, a lot of clubs being relegated, the uncertainty that creates every season. And there are some people that love that, and there are other people that hate it. We've got to find a mid ground. The payment of players is definitely an issue. I mean, it is causing significant problems in many clubs. And actually, most people are probably aware we already have a fairly new regulation in place that says you can play, but it's self-declared, but you pay over a certain level and you cut yourself off from RFU support. And there are a number of clubs on the back of this very issue at the moment, rethinking their position on that because they're realising they've just been turned down for a loan, or they're not going to be able to get a grant because their money has gone into different places. So you can only do that when you've got a really, really strong infrastructure underneath you. And then the third thing is, what is this community rugby club really about? Is it an obsession with the first team and where the first team are, or is it a community club in the broadest context of having large mini and junior base, offering women's rugby, several senior teams, a good strong Colts team? And there's an opportunity here to reset the place of that club in its local community. I think there's some fantastic things community rugby clubs are doing right now, delivering prescriptions and letting their kitchens out, and all sorts of things in the local community. And as a sport, it's one of our USPs. I think that very, very few other sports have, and the majority of them look on very, very jealously. So I think it's time and an opportunity to lever our strength in this place, but accept that things may need and will need to change.
There should always, I think there should always be a place for an aspirational club. And you look at Exeter, way back in the day, I remember playing against Exeter seconds, and their warm down took longer than our warm up. I remember thinking then these guys are going somewhere. In my days at Old Patesians, and I think there are 2 points just quickly. So the first one is that what applies in Cumbria and Cornwall and Lancashire, from a structural perspective, we shouldn't broad brush over London. I think we need to have different approaches for different regions. If you think about someone in Chris's club, for example, I'm not saying Chris does or doesn't pay players, but for that team in Brixham to get up to Maidenhead, you're asking somebody to take off the whole of his Saturday to do that. And at the same level, you might have somebody who's traveling 10 miles in London. And, the difference in commitment is massive. So it may well be a club in the extremities at a certain level does need to give players some form of support financially. And I completely get that. But from a completely amateur perspective, equally, I love playing against the clubs that have got money and got fantastic facilities, because it makes beating them all the better, quite frankly. And it's the talk that I use pretty much every week, because we are, without shadow of a doubt, the team at level 6 with the lowest turnover in our league. And so you can always use that, but I wouldn't ever want to stand in the way of an aspirational club that has good things going for it, that is charging through the leagues. Because personally, I think the Premiership's a cabal, and I'd like to see it broken. I like seeing it broken up. I like seeing clubs force their way through the leagues, and good on them if they can sustain it. Now, against that, it's got to be sustainable. So there are no end of clubs that we can all use in our different constituent areas who've flown through the leagues on the basis of one person's money. That person's pulled the money out, and they've not even bothered to slip back down the leagues. They've just started right again at the bottom. Now, that is the sort of thing that we need to try and address. Now, that's more difficult to address, but it's something I think that's very different from a club that has aspiration and is doing it the right way.
I think Dickon's absolutely right, Alex, in what he's saying, and there does need to be different things for different clubs or different areas. Yeah, you're right. From Brixham to Maidenhead's a long way. From Cambourne to Maidenhead and Bracknell's even further. And those guys, are taking the whole day. Literally, we're leaving home at 7 o'clock in the morning, getting back at 10 o'clock at night. And you say to a self-employed individual or somebody with a family that we're not going to be able to recompense you in any way, that's very difficult. Yeah, we pay our players, but we're within the limits and we pay through PAYE. And it's about being open and prepared that I think whatever comes, whatever the new rugby looks like, it is going to be different. And maybe we need to think about how we incentivise different individuals in a different way. And that's certainly some of the conversations I'm having with our exec and our coaching team and our players.
Yeah, I think it's you can't do broad brushstrokes across any of this. People have been talking a lot recently about the Richmond model, and I think that's great if you're in Richmond and you can offer or help jobs in the city and places where there's big salaries. But if you're, I think we had Paul Turner on a few weeks ago, and he was saying, but when you're in Bedfordshire and in the middle of nowhere, and there isn't the big jobs in the city, then it's a lot different. I'm sure that's geographical as well. But just want to kind of bring us back just to the sort of main issue, because we've got a few bits and pieces here. Someone's asking about boot camps and some kind of organised fitness rugby boot camp that could start perhaps before the actual season, that's maybe organised by the RFU. Can you see that sort of thing happen? More structured programmes for getting people rugby ready again? Because obviously the Premiership clubs and everyone else has got their S&Cs, but this is a different kind of getting ready now that we've all got to do.
Well, Arsenal are doing it, aren't they? Arsenal are back in training to some degree, football. And you can actually, if you want to bring physicality in, you can use tackle shields at a safe distance, and you can pick the tackle shield up yourself. So I think when everything is sort of slightly releasing, I think there's certainly a scope for getting people back on rugby pitches 3 or 4 metres apart, getting fit, personally.
Steve, is that sort of thing you envisage?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a different motivation here to get professional sport back on its feet, and I think government realise that sort of part of the psyche of the country needs professional sport, needs to get that enhanced. As I said earlier, I mean, our aim is as soon as there's any movement in the social distancing measures, we explore what that means for our sport, and we get people back active as quickly as we can. One of the challenges that faces us as a team sport is that we don't get ambushed here by some of the individual sports. It's going to be a lot easier to go and pick up a tennis racket or keep going for a run or get back on a bike or even get back in a pool. The challenges facing team sports are going to be greater. I think there's a couple of things we'll do. One, we're already working on some sort of S&C type stuff that we can get out there and put out there, so that where clubs don't have that facility, that's available online. And then we are planning for a fairly significant campaign when rugby can get rebooted. So time to be determined, but a couple of weeks before the season starts, where we really try and get some big collateral, big asset, big push behind rugby rebooting itself. And again, that's when getting people back to our clubs, and a couple of people mentioned it earlier, it's a huge opportunity, where we've got those environments.
And these are going to jump about a little bit. Someone has asked, what plans the RFU have for banning the payment of players at any level? Is that an actual thing that's on the table?
Payment of, as we discussed earlier, whether you want to use the word ban at the moment, it's very difficult to implement and police and govern. But I saw that it came from Trevor, I think, who was involved in the early payment of players discussions that we had a couple of years ago that put the current regulations in place. It's a debate. There's no doubt about it. It's going to be reopened, and it's reopening right now. It's reopening in the media, and that's often the worst place to let it reopen. Whether it results in a ban, who knows?
And if next season starts in January, how could there be promotion and relegation?
How could there be promotion and relegation from the following season?
If you end up having to run a shorter season, is it fair for a side to go up and down? I mean, you kind of alluded to it earlier on where you said maybe the season takes a different format. Is that something that might be looked at?
Yeah, I mean, look, we all know full well that you're sort of damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. Whatever decision ultimately is made, it's a bit like this season. The decision not to null and void the leagues was one that was valued by the vast majority, apart from the handful of clubs that felt that they could have avoided relegation or that they could have achieved promotion. The only feasible way that you can see doing that in January is only playing each other once, isn't it? And then you get into the whole thing about home and away and how that works through.
Why don't we just have half a season just playing rugby?
Yeah.
Let's get obsessed.
Well, then, no, but the question mark was about promotion and relegation. If you just have a season playing rugby, you don't need to worry about promotion and relegation, do you?
Well, that's the point I'm making. If it starts in January, half a season, just let's play rugby. and then worry about promotion relegation. Don't get obsessed with promotion and relegation.
Interestingly, though, Mark, that was from a Mr. Steve Hill. So that may have been a loaded question.
Yeah. Yes.
Perhaps completely sort of related. Someone's asked, do you think you should only be promoted if you have facilities that are relevant to the level that you're striving for?
I have a strong view on that, which is that I think at the top, maybe the top two levels, that's important. But where, you've got teams at level 3 who have smaller crowds than we sometimes get at London Cornish, I really don't see why you need to have particularly amazing facilities. And I think, to Mark's point, that wherever you're going to draw the line of where the grassroots game starts, I think you should allow any club, whatever their facilities, to play to that top level. I think beyond that, in the Championship and the Premiership, I think there should be some form of standard. Notwithstanding the efforts the Pirates are trying to make sure that when the opportunity arises for them to go right up to the top level, they have the right level. It needs to be tiered. But I certainly don't think you should stop a club like Ampthill getting all the way up to where they've got to, with just a fence around a pitch, frankly.
Okay, I'm going to go move this on because I think this next question is really important as well. And this is something that was brought up in one of our previous debates, where they felt that the kids' rugby is going to be the last level to be allowed in, perhaps until there's even a vaccine, was their just guess, they were saying. What about age grade rugby? Are we in danger of having a lost generation where enough parents opt out of kids doing rugby that so many age grade teams fold? So is that something that's been looked at as well, Steve, the age grade side of things?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, it's a massive concern, not just from the next generation coming through, but many clubs would argue that's a massive source of revenue for them as well. And if you half the numbers of age grade players turning up on a Sunday morning next season, there'll be a pretty significant impact at not all clubs, but at many clubs. Yeah. The judgment the discussions that we've had so far is, parents are going to fall into two groups broadly, and then there's a whole host in the middle. There are those that are going to want just to get the kids back out of the house and get them down somewhere, and if they're back at school, they're in contact with people, they're pretty risk averse, they'll get stuck back in there. And then there's going to be a group that are probably going to want to cotton wool people. What we've got to do is just promote the safe environment, the positive environment, the upside of getting back involved in the sport and the activity and the social side on a Sunday morning. But yes, of course there's a risk.
And I mean, overall, having looked up and down the country as well, do you think we are going to see clubs that aren't going to make it through this?
I think with a fair wind that if we can get rugby played again in September, October time, and clubs can generate some of the lost revenue that they've lost over this 3-month period, I suspect we may see a few that won't make it, but I think they're probably underlying issues anyway, and this may be the final straw. But I think the bigger risk is if we don't get rugby played until January, and we don't have an ability through social distancing remaining and mass events still not being allowed to regenerate that revenue. I think that's the biggest risk.
Yeah. Okay. That's great. Well, thank you very much, guys. That's really interesting. I think so. The key things here, like, make sure you check out England Rugby /COVID coronavirus.
Yeah.
And there's there's information on all the loans that are available and grants. That's right.
Correct. Yep.
In terms of going through the local unions as well, is that a good port of call? Is information being put through those?
Absolutely. The local constituent bodies, again, massive call out to all of the volunteers that run those CBs. They've been awesome over the last 6 weeks or so in terms of the support that they give to their clubs, and a huge amount of expertise there locally too.
And I think the other thing is just to keep on. I mean, this is where social media, I think, has really come into its own, in that it's given a lot of us a lot of inspiration. And if you do look at any of the social media channels from any of the local clubs, just by following certain threads, if you're looking whether it's any of them on England Rugby, you're seeing a lot of good ideas for people getting together. So really it's a case of trying to do whatever you can to try to keep your players engaged. And, it's bringing everyone together, I guess, in other ways. So thank you very much, everyone. And next week, we've got a brilliant panel as well. We've got Susie Appleby from Exeter Chiefs. We've got Katie Daly-McLean from Sale Sharks. And we've got Simon Middleton, the England women's coach as well, who are coming on board to talk about setting up the new sides and the impact of COVID on the Tyrrell Premier 15s at a key time in its development, I think. And so please, information on that is going to be on the Rugby Journal site within the next 24 hours. This is going to be put live in all its entirety on the same page, the Rugby Journal /lockdown. And the other good news is that the Rugby Journal is going to happen next month. So Eddie Jones has been speaking to us, which has been amazing. So we've got him as our cover star, which is fantastic. So please make sure you're subscribing. And thank you again to all our panelists, and see you all next week. So thanks very much, Steve, John, Dickon, Mark and Chris, and take care, everyone. Thank you very much.